The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with noise from 100 different alien voices as Kyle Harrison stood at the platform reserved for human delegates, and he felt the weight of countless eyes watching him from every corner of the massive chamber where representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to decide the fate of entire star systems. Kyle pressed the button to activate the translation device and spoke clearly into the microphone that would carry his words to every species present, regardless of whether they heard through ears, or felt through vibrations, or sensed through methods humans still did not fully understand. He said that humanity requested a delay of 30 days before committing any military forces to the operation known as the Dracon Accord, because they believed more diplomatic options existed that had not been fully explored, and that rushing into military action might create problems worse than the ones they were trying to solve. The response was immediate laughter that echoed through the chamber like a wave crashing against rocks, and the sound came from every direction, as alien species of all types found amusement in the human request. Commander Zethrak of the Kryn stood, up to his full height, which was nearly 3 times that of a human, and his scales rippled with colors that the translation system indicated meant contempt and mockery, as he spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. He said that humans were typical in their approach and always wanted to talk instead of act, and always preferred endless discussions to necessary action, and he reminded everyone that humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, which was nothing compared to civilizations that had maintained order for thousands of years. Lydia Foster, who stood beside Kyle as his second-in-command, kept her face calm, but her hand gripped the edge of their platform tightly enough that her knuckles turned white, and she wanted to respond, but knew that interrupting would only make things worse. Zethrak continued by saying that the Dracon Accord required immediate military response, because pirate groups in the Outer Reach territories had been disrupting trade and attacking peaceful colonies for too long, and delay would only encourage more violence. He added that humanity had demonstrated no real military capability since joining the galactic community, and maintained a pathetic fleet of only 200 ships compared to the Kryn fleet of 20,000 vessels, and this made human opinions on military matters essentially worthless. Other delegates joined in the mockery, and the Velan representatives, whose bodies were made of living crystal, pulsed with light patterns that meant agreement, and even the normally diplomatic Kicks, who lived in water-filled tanks, remained silent, which everyone understood as tacit support for the Kryn position. Kyle waited for the noise to die down before speaking again, and he kept his voice level and calm as he explained that humanity's reluctance to embrace military solutions came from their own painful history, where they had learned the terrible cost of war and believed such costs should only be accepted as an absolute last resort. Zethrak laughed even harder at this and said that yes, everyone had studied human history and found it amusing that humans had nearly destroyed themselves with primitive weapons and fought pointless wars that accomplished nothing. And this was the species that now presumed to lecture ancient civilizations about the proper use of force. He pointed out that humanity had spent decades after achieving faster than light travel, focused on exploration and cultural exchange, instead of military development, which he called charming but useless, because it left humans militarily insignificant on the galactic stage. Another delegate, whose name Kyle could not pronounce, added that humans were adequate scientists and competent doctors, and occasionally produced interesting art. But when real power was needed to maintain order, humanity hid behind words while others did the actual work. Kyle felt frustration building in his chest but kept it from showing on his face, and he glanced at Lydia, who gave him a small nod of encouragement before he spoke again. He said that humanity believed their contributions to science and medicine and cultural understanding had value, and that not every problem required a military solution, and that perhaps the Council should consider whether the pirate problem in the Outer Reach might have underlying causes that military force would not address. The laughter this time was even louder and longer, and Zethrak made a dismissive gesture with one clawed hand that needed no translation. The prelate who served as chairman of the council, and whose insect-like body clicked and clattered as he moved, announced that the human request for delay was denied, and the Dracon Accord would proceed in 7 days as planned, and humanity could contribute token forces if they wished, but the operation would not wait for endless human debate. Kyle took a deep breath and made a decision that he knew would have consequences, and he said clearly that humanity would not be participating in the Dracon Accord operation because they did not believe military action was appropriate at this time. The chamber fell silent for a moment, as if every delegate had stopped breathing at once, and then the silence broke with laughter that was even more intense than before. Zethrak said that humans were now completely irrelevant, and when the adults of the galaxy handled important security matters, the children could wait quietly, and he made another dismissive gesture that clearly meant the humans were being told to leave. Kyle and Lydia gathered their materials and walked out of the chamber with their heads held high, even as the mocking laughter followed them down the long corridor, and Kyle could hear Zethrak's voice behind them, saying something about philosophical cowards who were afraid to fight. In their private quarters, Lydia finally let her anger show, and she hit the wall hard enough to make the display screens flicker, and she said through clenched teeth that the aliens treated humans like they were nothing. Kyle poured water into a glass with steady hands and said that the aliens treated humans like they were weak, and by their definition perhaps humans were weak because they measured strength only in terms of military might. Lydia asked how long humanity would continue accepting this treatment, and being the joke of the galactic community, and being dismissed whenever they tried to contribute meaningful input. Kyle looked out the window at the stars beyond and said that their orders from Earth were very clear, and they were to avoid military entanglements while focusing on building relationships and gathering intelligence about the true state of galactic politics. He told Lydia to send the report back to Earth and inform the leadership that the Dracon Accord was proceeding exactly as their analysts had predicted, and to remind them that while the galaxy focused all attention on the Outer Reach territories, they should pay very close attention to what was happening everywhere else. Lydia asked if Kyle thought the current situation was connected to the intelligence reports they had been receiving about unusual communications between various hostile groups, and Kyle said he was certain of it. He said that the galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity, but it would not be the lesson that the aliens expected, and Lydia asked what he meant, but Kyle just smiled and said they would know soon enough. 3 days later, the combined fleet of the Dracon Accord assembled at a staging point called the Kepler Nexus, and it was an impressive display of military power with 6,000 warships from 14 different species, all bristling with enough weapons to destroy entire planets. Commander Zethrak stood on the bridge of his flagship called the Razor Wind and looked at his armada with satisfaction, and he asked his tactical officer if the humans had sent any final messages. The officer said that humanity had sent a brief communication wishing the fleet well and hoping for swift resolution with minimal casualties, and Zethrak laughed at what he called typical human nonsense that offered words instead of ships. He told his officers that it was better that humans stayed home because their inadequate vessels would only complicate operations, and real warriors did not need philosophers getting in the way. The massive fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel and headed toward the Outer Reach territories where pirate forces waited, and none of the commanders noticed the small human observation ship that watched them depart and transmitted detailed information about fleet composition and departure vectors back to Earth. The Dracon Accord operation lasted 3 weeks, and during that time, Commander Zethrak's massive fleet swept through the Outer Reach territories with overwhelming force that destroyed pirate bases and scattered raider groups that had plagued the region for many years. The military campaign was successful by every measure that the Kryn used to evaluate such things, and the final reports showed 137 pirate bases destroyed, and 400 enemy ships eliminated, and all major trade routes secured for peaceful commerce. The casualty ratio favored the Accord forces heavily, because for every Allied ship lost in combat, the pirates lost 15 vessels, and Zethrak considered this an excellent result that proved the value of decisive military action. When the fleet returned to Council space, the Galactic Council gathered to celebrate the victory, and Prelate Voss opened the session by praising Zethrak for tactical brilliance that had achieved all objectives ahead of schedule. Zethrak accepted the praise with a bow of his massive head and said that the operation succeeded because the Accord forces acted with strength and unity, and there had been no hesitation or endless debate, and they had identified a threat and eliminated it completely. Senator Quinn of the Velan delegation asked if the humans had offered any response to the great victory, and her crystalline body pulsed with colors that indicated curiosity mixed with continued amusement at human weakness. Kyle Harrison activated The human platform said that humanity congratulated the Accord forces on their tactical success and hoped that lasting peace could now be achieved in the Outer Reach territories. Zethrak repeated the word hope with clear mockery in his voice and said that humans always offered hope and pretty words, but never action and never results, and this was why they remained irrelevant. Kyle asked calmly if the commander had received any reports from his home territories in the past 3 days, and the question seemed strange enough that the noise in the chamber decreased as other delegates wondered why the human would ask such a thing. Zethrak said that his home territories were secure and well defended, because unlike some species, the Kryn did not leave their worlds vulnerable while projecting power across the galaxy. Kyle said he was certain the Kryn defenses were formidable, but asked again if Zethrak had received recent reports, and the commander's scales rippled with irritation at the persistent questioning. Before Zethrak could respond, his communication officer appeared on the holographic display beside him, and the officer's body language showed clear panic as he delivered urgent news. The officer reported that the Vex had invaded the northern provinces of Kryn space and 6 colony worlds were under attack, and High Command was requesting immediate fleet redeployment to defend their own territory. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates from multiple species began receiving similar emergency communications, and it became clear within minutes that something terrible had happened while everyone focused on the Outer Reach. The Velen received reports that mining operations in their home system had been sabotaged by unknown raiders, and the Kix learned that agricultural stations had been attacked by pirates from sectors completely different from the Outer Reach. Zethrak demanded to know how the Vex had penetrated Kryn sensor networks, and his officer explained with a shaking voice that the enemy had not come through the normal border zones. The Vex forces had hidden themselves in the Kepler Nexus staging area among civilian traffic, and when the Accord fleet departed, they had followed the jump signature and bypassed all outer defenses by using the same route that Zethrak's own ships had used. Within an hour, the scope of the disaster became clear, as reports continued arriving from across the galaxy, and while the Council forces had concentrated in the Outer Reach, enemies had struck everywhere else in a coordinated attack that seemed impossible without detailed intelligence. Zethrak said this level of coordination was impossible without someone providing information about fleet movements and timing, and his eyes narrowed as he looked at the human delegation. Kyle spoke quietly and said that unless someone had told the various enemy forces exactly where the Council fleets would be, and how long they would be gone, and which territories would be left vulnerable, Prelate Voss leaned forward and asked if Kyle was suggesting that someone on the Council had betrayed them, and his mandibles clicked with agitation at the implications. Kyle shook his head and said no, he was not suggesting betrayal by a Council member, but rather that the Council had betrayed itself by being so eager to demonstrate military superiority that they walked into an obvious trap. He explained that the Outer Reach pirates were never the real threat, and they had been bait to draw away the Council fleets, and everyone had been so focused on military action that they ignored intelligence warnings. Senator Quinn's crystalline form pulsed red with anger as she asked if humanity had known about this plot, and Kyle said that humans had suspected something was wrong based on unusual communication patterns between the pirates and other hostile groups over the past 6 months. Lydia added that human intelligence services had flagged these patterns in reports to the Council, but those reports had been dismissed as more examples of human timidity and paranoia. Zethrak accused humans of not warning the Council forcefully enough, and Kyle replied that they had tried by requesting delays and suggesting diplomatic approaches that might reveal the larger conspiracy, but the Council had laughed at them. He reminded Zethrak that humans had asked for 30 days to investigate further, and had been mocked and told that children should not lecture adults about galactic security. The chamber fell into tense silence as delegates realized the magnitude of their error, and Zethrak finally asked how long it would take to recall the scattered fleets and redeploy them to defend their home territories. He answered his own question by saying it would take weeks, and during that time many worlds would fall to the coordinated attacks. Kyle said carefully that perhaps humanity could offer assistance, and the response was bitter laughter, much quieter than before because several delegates suspected they knew what was coming. Zethrak said that even if humans deployed their entire fleet of 200 ships, It would make no meaningful difference because they could not defend dozens of worlds across half the galaxy. Kyle agreed that the human fleet alone could not accomplish such a task, and then he paused before adding that the 200 ships were never humanity's real military capability, and they had only ever been what humans allowed the Council to see. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with data, and the information that appeared made every delegate fall silent in shock. The display showed ship manifests and station locations and defense grids and force deployments on a scale that dwarfed what anyone had believed possible for humanity. Kyle explained that humanity had been in space for 50 years, and while they spent the first decades exploring and building relationships, they had also spent that time constructing deep space manufacturing facilities far from mapped trade routes. He said that humans had built defense stations in systems the Council never surveyed, and constructed ships by the thousands that were never registered because they operated outside Council jurisdiction. Prelate Voss protested weakly that this violated the non-proliferation accords, and Lydia pulled up the actual treaty language to show that humanity had violated nothing. She explained that the accords limited the size of official military fleets in Council space, but said nothing about vessels operating outside Council territory, and did not define what made a ship military versus civilian. Senator Quinn asked in shock if humans had been hiding a secret armada for decades, and Lydia said they preferred to think of it as maintaining strategic reserves. She added that while other species focused on projecting power, humanity focused on protecting what mattered, and while others measured strength in dreadnoughts, humans invested in distributed defense networks and rapid response capabilities. Zethrak demanded to know why humanity built such forces while pretending to be weak, and Kyle said because they learned from their own history. He explained that the strongest nation often becomes the first target, and those who appear weak are often underestimated, and in a galaxy full of predators, the best survival strategy is not being the biggest predator. Kyle said the real strategy was being the one that nobody sees coming until the moment when action becomes necessary. He changed the display to show real-time tactical data, where human ships were already moving into position throughout all the affected regions, and the number of vessels appearing on sensors shocked every delegate. There were not hundreds, but thousands of human ships materializing across dozens of star systems, and their stealth technology had hidden them until they chose to reveal themselves. Kyle said that for 50 years the galaxy had mocked humanity's silence and mistaken restraint for weakness and patience, for inability and preference for peace as fear of war. He added that everyone had been so busy laughing that nobody asked why a species that nearly destroyed itself with nuclear weapons would be satisfied with only 200 registered ships. Zethrak stared at the tactical display, watching human vessels take defensive positions around Kryn colonies with precision that suggested months of planning. He said slowly that humans had been waiting for exactly this situation, and the human fleet moved through the darkness of space with a silence that matched their reputation, and unlike the massive dreadnoughts favored by species like the Kryn or the crystalline battlespheres used by the Velen, the human warships followed a completely different design philosophy. Captain Amy Brooks sat in the command chair of her destroyer called the Swift Justice, and around her a crew of only 60 people operated systems that would require 3 times that many on vessels from other species. Human ships were smaller and faster and packed with automated systems that other species considered either too dangerous or too complicated to trust with their lives. Lieutenant Greg Palmer at the tactical station reported that they were approaching the Vex attack fleet, which consisted of 12 capital ships and 47 support vessels, arranged in formation around a Kryn colony world called Talos 4. Amy asked if the enemy had detected their approach, and Greg said negative, because the stealth systems were holding perfectly, and at their current range the Swift Justice was practically invisible to Vex sensors. Amy studied the tactical display and saw that the Vex fleet was systematically bombarding the orbital defenses while preparing ground forces for planetary invasion, and it was a standard siege operation that relied on overwhelming power without any subtlety. She asked about the status of other human battle groups, and Commander Lisa Hayes at Communications reported that Beta and Gamma groups were in position while Delta Group was running 5 minutes behind schedule, but would be ready soon. Amy asked about the Kryn Defense Force, even though she already knew the answer. and Lisa confirmed they were still 16 hours away at maximum speed, and the colony garrison was fighting, but badly outgunned. Lisa added that intelligence estimated the garrison had about 6 hours before the orbital defenses failed completely. And Amy nodded because 6 hours gave them plenty of time if their strategy worked. She told Lisa to open a communications channel to the Vex flagship on all frequencies at maximum broadcast strength, and Lisa looked surprised but followed the order immediately. Amy took a breath and spoke clearly, saying that this was Captain Amy Brooks of the Earth vessel. Swift Justice and the Vex fleet was conducting an unprovoked attack on a civilian colony. She said the Vex had one opportunity to withdraw peacefully, and if they did not begin retreat procedures within 5 minutes, then human forces would remove them by force. The bridge crew maintained their composure, but Amy could feel tension in the air because everyone knew how her ultimatum sounded when one destroyer challenged an entire attack fleet. The Vex commander appeared on the view screen, and he was a massive creature that looked like someone had combined a bear with a crustacean and added too many arms, and his voice came through the translator as grinding and contemptuous. He said that his sensors had analyzed the human vessel and determined it was one destroyer with a crew of 60 and weapons adequate for patrol duties, but no match for a battle fleet, and therefore the Swift Justice represented no real threat. The Vex commander told Amy to withdraw immediately or be destroyed as an afterthought to the main operation, and Amy replied that she had given fair warning and the consequences were now on the Vex. She closed the channel and turned to Greg and told him to light up the enemy targets, and Greg said with pleasure that he would comply with that order. The Swift Justice had been designed with one principle guiding every decision, and that principle was maximum firepower for minimum mass, and while other species built bigger ships with bigger guns, humans focused on precision and coordination and overwhelming first-strike capability. The destroyer's missile batteries opened fire, and instead of the massive slow torpedoes that most species used, the Swift Justice launched waves of small, fast, intelligent munitions that could think for themselves and adjust their approach in real time. Each missile was barely larger than a person, but they moved at speeds close to the speed of light and carried shaped charge warheads designed by engineers who had spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction. The first wave hit the Vex fleet. Before they could even raise defensive shields, and 80 missiles struck with each one, targeting a specific vulnerable point that human intelligence had identified over the past weeks. Point defense batteries tried to respond, but the missiles were too small and too fast and too smart, and they dodged and weaved and coordinated their approaches like hunting animals working together. Explosions bloomed across the Vex fleet, and 3 support vessels disappeared in flowers of nuclear fire, while a capital ship lost its main engines and began tumbling out of control. Greg reported calmly that the second wave was away, and the Vex were now responding with their own weapons coming online, and massive plasma bolts began streaking toward the Swift Justice. Amy ordered evasive pattern Delta, and the ship moved in. Ways that seemed impossible, and human vessels could not take hits the way massive dreadnoughts could, so they simply did not get hit. The Swift Justice danced through space with her fusion drives firing in precisely calculated bursts that made her trajectory completely unpredictable, and the plasma bolts passed through empty space, missing by meters. Amy told Lisa to signal all battle groups to execute their attack plans, and Lisa confirmed the order, and across the entire star system, 20 more human destroyers dropped their stealth systems and opened fire. The Vex fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by enemies that should not have been there, and taking fire from angles they had not covered, and more support vessels died while a capital ship's reactor went critical and exploded. Greg reported that the enemy was trying to regroup into a defensive sphere formation, and Amy said perfect because that was exactly what human planners had predicted they would do. She ordered all ships to execute Target Package Charlie, and the human fleet shifted their fire from spreading damage across multiple targets to concentrating everything on a single capital ship. Hundreds of missiles converged on one vessel and overwhelmed its defenses through sheer volume, and the shields held for nearly 10 seconds before collapsing completely. The follow-up waves of missiles tore through armor and destroyed internal systems and triggered secondary explosions that gutted the ship from inside, and Greg confirmed one capital ship destroyed. He added that the enemy fleet was attempting to accelerate out of the engagement zone, and Amy said not to let them, and ordered all ships into pursuit pattern. The battle continued for another 40 minutes, and the Vex fought with the desperation of predators that had suddenly become prey, and they managed to kill 3 human destroyers and damage 7 others. But the outcome was never in doubt, and by the time Kryn reinforcements arrived, the Vex attack fleet had been reduced to wreckage and debris floating in space. Admiral Jack Morrison commanded the human task force from his carrier called the Resolution, and he opened a channel to the arriving Kryn forces. He told Commander Zethrak that Talos IV was secure, and the Vex fleet had been neutralized, and colony casualties had been kept to a minimum. Zethrak appeared on screen, and his reptilian features showed an expression that the translation system struggled to interpret as he asked slowly how humans had destroyed an entire Vex attack fleet with only 21 destroyers. Jack corrected him by saying it was 24 destroyers plus 3 frigates and 1 carrier, and they had not destroyed the entire fleet because 8 Vex ships managed to escape. He added that they were tracking the escapees but thought Zethrak might want the honor of pursuit, and Zethrak asked how this victory was even possible. Jack smiled slightly and explained that humans did not fight the way other species did, and they did not build ships to slug it out in traditional line battles. He said human vessels were designed to strike fast and strike hard and avoid getting hit, and they used coordination instead of mass and precision instead of overwhelming power. Jack added that humans could not have planned for the Vex to attack, Talos IV specifically, but they had planned for someone to attack somewhere, and positioned assets throughout frontier regions based on threat analysis. Zethrak said this was only 1 colony and 1 battle, and there were dozens of attacks happening across the galaxy simultaneously. Jack replied that human fleets were responding to all of them, and while they could not be everywhere, they could be in enough places to make a real difference. He said that Zethrak's reinforcements could handle cleanup at Talos IV, because human forces were needed elsewhere, and the tactical display updated to show human ships engaging enemy fleets in 7 different sectors at once. Each engagement followed similar patterns with smaller human vessels using speed and stealth, and coordinated attacks to defeat larger enemy forces. Zethrak asked quietly why humans had not told the Council about their true capabilities, and Jack asked if Zethrak would have believed them if they had. He asked if the Council would have accepted humanity's strategic assessment if humans had appeared with thousands of warships, or would the Council have viewed them as a threat to be contained. Zethrak's silence provided the answer, and Jack continued by saying that humans chose to appear weak because being underestimated was a strategic advantage. He added that more importantly, humans chose restraint because they understood what military power could do to a civilization's soul, and the galaxy did not need another species trying to prove strength. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session exactly 72 hours after the coordinated attacks began, and the Great Chamber was filled with tension that felt almost physical, as delegates who had been smug and dismissive just 1 week ago now wore expressions ranging from confusion to barely controlled anger. Prelate Voss called the session to order with a sharp click of his mandibles and announced that the Council recognized Ambassador Kyle Harrison of Earth. Kyle stood at the human delegation platform, and this time the chamber fell silent, not with mockery but with the wary silence of those who had made serious miscalculations and knew it. He reported that humanity had deployed forces to 16 sectors in response to the coordinated attacks, and current status updates indicated successful repulsion of invasions in 12 locations, with threats contained in 3 others, and 1 ongoing operation still in progress. Kyle paused to let the numbers register with the assembled delegates before continuing, and he said that preliminary casualty estimates suggested human intervention had prevented the deaths of approximately 80 million civilians across multiple species. He added that human fleet operations were being coordinated with local defense forces and arriving Council reinforcements, and they were providing tactical intelligence and logistical support and direct military intervention where needed. Kyle emphasized that humanity had asked for nothing in return for this assistance, and Senator Quinn's crystalline form pulsed with careful blue light, which meant cautious respect in Velan body language. She said that she believed she spoke for many delegates when she stated that humanity's capabilities had proven far beyond what the Council understood, and an apology was owed. Kyle replied that apologies were unnecessary because understanding was more valuable than regrets, and Zethrak leaned forward from his platform and asked for that understanding. He said that human fleets appeared to operate unlike any military force in the galaxy, and their ships were smaller yet somehow more effective, and their tactics were unconventional but devastatingly successful. Zethrak added that human strategic positioning suggested they had been planning for exactly this scenario for years, and he asked how all of this was possible. Kyle glanced at Lydia, who gave a small nod because they had discussed this moment many times and decided that honesty was the best approach within the limits of operational security. He began by saying that the answer lay in human history, and explained that humans were a species that emerged from a single world where they were simultaneously apex predators and endangered prey. Kyle said that humans fought each other for thousands of years and developed strategies for warfare that ranged from individual combat to conflicts spanning entire continents. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's history in compressed form, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably as they watched the timeline of human violence. Kyle explained that humans fought with stones and spears, and then bronze and iron, and then gunpowder and steel, and eventually they developed chemical weapons and biological weapons and nuclear weapons. He said humans created military strategies that accounted for everything from supply lines to psychological manipulation to information control. And at their worst, they came within moments of making their own planet uninhabitable. Prelate Voss asked dryly if this history was meant to reassure the Council, and Kyle said no, it was meant to explain humanity. He continued by saying that after humans came so close to self-destruction, they made a choice and decided that their capacity for violence should never disappear, because it was too fundamental to their nature. But humans also decided that this capacity should be controlled and directed, and used only in defense of life, rather than conquest or dominance. Zethrak said that was a noble philosophy, but asked how philosophy built secret fleets or developed revolutionary tactics. Lydia stood beside Kyle and asked if philosophy did not do exactly that, and she explained that human philosophy shaped everything about how they approached becoming a spacefaring civilization. She said that when humans achieved faster than light travel, they had a choice between spreading rapidly to claim territory or expanding slowly and carefully, and they chose caution. Lydia added that when humans made first contact with galactic civilization, they could have tried to project power immediately, or they could watch and learn, and they chose to learn. She highlighted sections of the timeline showing that for 50 years humans sent explorers and scientists and diplomats while other species sent soldiers and admirals. Lydia said humans built research stations while others built battle stations, and the Council thought humans were being naive, but humans were being strategic. Senator Quinn asked how this approach was strategic, and Kyle explained that humans were gathering intelligence about potential threats, and every exploration mission mapped possible dangers. He said that every cultural exchange identified diplomatic leverage points, and every scientific collaboration gave humans insight into other species' technology. Kyle emphasized that humans were not just learning about the galaxy but preparing to defend their place in it, and the weakness others perceived was actually calculated positioning. Zethrak said slowly that every time the Council mocked humans for having only 200 ships, humanity was hiding thousands more. And Kyle corrected him. He said humans were not hiding ships but positioning them, and those vessels were deployed to deep space manufacturing facilities and defense platforms and sensor networks in locations that would not draw attention. Kyle explained that humans built a distributed defense system that did not rely on massive fleets that could be tracked and targeted like the Council forces. Senator Quinn asked about the human ships themselves, because the destroyer at Talos 4 had performed impossible maneuvers and delivered firepower equivalent to vessels 3 times its size. Captain Amy Brooks entered the chamber at that moment because she had been invited to provide tactical expertise, and she explained that human ships were designed around 3 core principles. Amy said the first principle was automation, because humans trusted artificial intelligence systems far more than most species, which meant smaller crews and faster response times. She said the second principle was modularity, because every human warship could be rapidly reconfigured for different mission profiles depending on what was needed. Amy explained that the third principle was survivability through mobility, because humans could not build shields as strong as other species or armor as thick, so they simply avoided getting hit. She pulled up technical specifications that had been simplified to avoid compromising operational security, and showed that human destroyers massed only about 60,000 tons, Amy said that was tiny compared to a Kryn dreadnought, but human. Destroyers carried point defense systems that could intercept 98% of incoming fire. She added that human engines could pull maneuvers that no other species considered possible, and weapon systems were optimized for precision rather than raw power. Amy explained that one human destroyer could not slug it out with a battleship in a direct fight, but 10 human destroyers working together could take down almost anything through coordination. Zethrak said thoughtfully that human battle tactics relied on multiple ships acting as a single unit, and Amy confirmed this was correct. She said humans called it network-centric warfare, where every ship shared sensor data and targeting information and tactical analysis in real time. Amy explained that when anyone fought human forces, they were not fighting individual ships, but rather a distributed intelligence that could adapt faster than any single commander. Prelate Voss leaned back in his seat and said that humans had essentially developed an entirely new paradigm of space warfare. Lydia said that was one way to look at it, but humans had simply adapted their historical experience to new circumstances. She explained that humans fought on Earth for millennia before going to space, and they understood asymmetric warfare and guerrilla tactics and strategic defense in ways that species who achieved spaceflight earlier simply did not. Senator Quinn observed that this was because humans were still killing each other, when other species were already exploring the stars, and her tone was not quite accusatory. Kyle agreed simply, and said that humans did not apologize for their history, because they could not change it, but they learned from every mistake and every tragedy. He said every hard-won lesson had been incorporated into how humans approached conflict in the modern era. Zethrak asked why humans stayed quiet about their capabilities when they could have revealed their strength at any time and claimed respect through power. Kyle replied that was not the kind of respect humans wanted, because they did not want the galaxy to respect them out of fear of their military. He said humans wanted to build genuine relationships and be valued for contributions to science and culture and diplomacy. Kyle explained that military capability was always meant to be a last resort, and something humans hoped they would never need to reveal. Lydia said firmly that humans revealed their capabilities now because people were dying, and worlds were being attacked, and the Council forces were out of position. She emphasized that lives mattered more than maintaining strategic ambiguity, and Kyle added that this was the core of human philosophy. Senator Quinn asked what happened now that everyone knew what humans were capable of, and how this changed the political. 3 months passed after the coordinated attacks, and the Galactic Council chamber now held a very different atmosphere as the emergency had finally ended, and human forces working alongside reinforced Council fleets had repelled the invasions and scattered the coordinated enemy alliance. The Vex had retreated to their home systems, and the pirate clans had been genuinely disrupted this time, and several hostile species that had opportunistically joined the attacks now faced consequences far stiffer than they had anticipated. Ambassador Kyle Harrison stood at the human delegation platform, but this time Admiral Jack Morrison stood beside him, along with a delegation of human military officers and strategic advisors that the Council had specifically requested be present. Prelate Voss announced that the Council recognized Ambassador Harrison for the presentation of the post-crisis strategic assessment, and Kyle activated a comprehensive holographic display. He thanked the prelate and explained that over the past 3 months humanity had worked closely with Council military forces to address security vulnerabilities that were exploited during the coordinated attacks. Kyle said their analysis had identified 3 critical failures in the galaxy's defensive posture, and the display shifted to show strategic maps. He explained that the first failure was over-centralization of military power, because major species maintained large fleets concentrated in a few key locations, which created obvious gaps. Kyle said the second failure was predictable deployment patterns, because Council military responses followed established protocols that any competent intelligence operation could anticipate. He added that the third failure was insufficient information sharing between member species, which meant threats were often identified too late. Zethrak activated his delegation platform and asked if Kyle was suggesting that the entire Council military structure needed to be reformed. Kyle replied that he was suggesting it needed to be augmented rather than replaced, because the current system worked well for conventional threats. He said the problem was that the system proved vulnerable to unconventional approaches, as they had all witnessed. Admiral Jack Morrison stepped forward and explained humanity's proposal, which they called the Distributed Defense Network. Jack said that instead of maintaining only large concentrated fleets, participating species would also deploy smaller, more mobile forces to key strategic locations throughout their territories. He explained that these forces would be coordinated through a shared tactical network, allowing rapid response to threats anywhere in Council space. Senator Quinn observed that humans were proposing the Council adopt human tactical doctrine, and Jack corrected her. He said they were proposing the Council adopt the parts that made sense for their strategic situation, because every species had different strengths. Jack explained that the Kryn were unmatched in direct fleet engagement and VLAN sensor technology was the best in the galaxy, and the Kix excelled at logistics and supply chain management. He said humanity's contribution was coordination and rapid deployment and asymmetric tactics, and the question was why not combine all these strengths. Zethrak studied the proposal with clear interest and said this would require unprecedented cooperation and trust between member species. Kyle agreed and said that was why they suggested starting small with a pilot program involving volunteers from 5 or 6 species testing the concept in a single sector. He explained that if it worked, the program could be expanded, and if it did not work, they would have learned valuable lessons with minimal risk. Prelate Voss asked if humanity would lead this initiative, and Lydia Foster clarified that humanity would contribute equally, alongside other participating species. She said leadership would rotate based on situation and expertise, because the point was not to establish human dominance but to create genuinely cooperative defense. Senator Quinn said carefully that some would argue humanity had already established dominance because human fleet actions during the crisis were decisive in numerous engagements. She added that human casualties were proportionally lower than any other species and tactical victories were near uniform. Quinn said that from a certain perspective, humans had demonstrated military superiority, and the chamber went very still, because this was the question everyone had been dancing around for months. She asked what human military superiority meant for the political order, and Kyle took a breath before responding. He said that humanity's fleet performed well because they had advance warning and careful positioning, and were fighting the kind of distributed rapid response conflict their doctrine was designed for. Kyle added that if humans faced a Kryn battle, group and conventional fleet engagement, the outcome would be far less certain. He explained that human ships were optimized for specific tactical scenarios, not general superiority. Zethrak noted that Kyle seemed to be carefully avoiding the question, and Kyle said he would be direct then. He asked if humanity could conquer territory if they wanted to, and answered probably, and could humans defeat any single council species in protracted war, and said it would depend on circumstances. But possibly. Kyle then asked if any of that mattered and answered not even slightly, because conquest was not humanity's objective, and never had been, and never would be. He gestured to the stars visible through the chamber viewports and said there were billions of worlds in the galaxy and more resources than any species could ever use. Kyle said the days when territorial conquest made economic or strategic sense ended the moment they achieved faster than light travel, because the galaxy was big enough for everyone. Senator Quinn asked what humanity wanted then, and Lydia answered that they wanted the same thing they had always wanted. She said humans wanted to explore and learn and build relationships and contribute to the galactic community. Lydia added that humans wanted to ensure neither they nor their friends faced existential threats, but they wanted to do all that as equals and partners, not as conquerors or overlords. Kyle continued by saying that the crisis revealed humanity was not weak, but it should also have revealed that humans were not expansionist or aggressive. He explained that humans had forces positioned to defend dozens of worlds, but none positioned to attack anyone. Kyle said they deployed to protect trade routes and colony worlds over control of strategic choke points, and their logistics network was designed to support extended defensive operations, not offensive campaigns. Zethrak was silent for a long moment, before admitting that if humans were planning conquest, they had done an exceptionally poor job of preparing for it. He said every human military asset he had observed was configured for defense or rapid response, and human fleet positioning prioritized protection over strategic advantage. Jack said firmly that he was a military officer and understood strategic thinking, and if humanity wanted to dominate the galaxy, This crisis would have been the perfect opportunity. He explained that humans could have let worlds fall, and then offered protection in exchange for political concessions or withheld intelligence to weaken potential rivals. Jack said humans could have positioned themselves as the only force capable of guaranteeing security, but they did none of those things. Senator Quinn said softly that humans helped unconditionally and saved Velan mining stations even though the Velan voted to mock human peace proposals. She said humans defended Kryn colonies, even though Zethrak called them weak and protected. Kix agricultural platforms, even though the Kix remained silent when humans were being ridiculed. Kyle said yes because that was what moral principles meant, and they did not only apply when it was convenient or when humans were being treated well. He said principles applied always and especially when it was difficult, and that was the difference between philosophy and mere tactics. Prelate Voss said that the council had debated how to respond to the revelation of humanity's true capabilities. He said some argued for restrictions and others for sanctions against deceptive military buildup, but most had come to realize such responses would be both unjust and counterproductive. Senator Quinn agreed it would be unjust because humanity violated no laws or treaties, and counterproductive because alienating their most effective defenders would be foolish. Lydia said humans did not want special treatment or fear or excessive deference, and they just wanted to be taken seriously when they spoke about strategic matters. She added that humans wanted their preference for diplomatic solutions treated as thoughtful analysis rather than naive weakness. Prelate Voss said he believed the council could agree to that, though it might take adjustment because 50 years of habits were difficult to break. Kyle said with a slight smile that humans were patient and had mentioned that before. Zethrak activated his platform again and asked a question that went beyond immediate politics. He said that Kyle had mentioned humanity learned from their violent history and chose to transform their capacity for warfare into a tool for protection rather than conquest. Zethrak asked how this transformation happened and what changed between the species that nearly destroyed itself and the species that now defended others. Kyle considered the question carefully before answering and said it was complex because part of the change was technological. He explained that once humans could destroy their entire world, the stakes became too high for traditional warfare. Kyle said part of the change was communication because global networks